Right now, Ukraine's triumph. This day will go down in history. Several hellish cauldrons at once. The Russians were torn to shreds. Putin is in shock. There's chaos and hysteria in the Kremlin. The Ukrainian armed forces have launched a counteroffensive. Azov struck fiercely in Donbas. The rout of the Russian army is the beginning of their end. Shock. Poland is reaching for the nuclear button. A nuclear weapon is being sent to the country right now. The Kremlin is tense. The West wants to finish off Moscow, and this strike could change everything. A Scandinavian strike. Denmark is entering the military orbit. Drones and missiles against the Kremlin. A crucial decision has been made. The country will strike Russia. The army is already on standby. The seas are boiling. An attack on the NATO fleet. Putin has decided to go through with it. The slaughter is already beginning. The alliance is preparing a tough response to the Kremlin. An energy apocalypse. Ukrainian strikes on the Kremlin's oil empire are changing the course of the war. Russia is on the brink of an energy collapse, and it seems the final blow has already been dealt. A theatrical show or a real threat? Lukashenko boasted about a new superweapon, a combat laser. Saffron, the pride of Belarus, a new threat to Ukraine from the north. All this and more in our program Hotspot. Urgent. The Ukrainian armed forces have launched a counter-offensive. The Russian army is trapped in hellish cauldrons. The occupiers are being pounded to the last man. The Kremlin is in a panic. Putin is being handed grim reports. Defeat is inevitable. This day will go down in history. Watch all the details from the front lines right now.
Ukraine is changing its tactics at the front, which has allowed the armed forces to go on the offensive. 2 Russian encirclements at once in Donetsk region and the prospect of a cauldron in Sumy region. The Russian Federation tortures its own soldiers who refuse to go on assaults. The main intelligence directorate has published intercepted conversations of the occupiers' command, as well as the spectacular destruction of a Russian command post in Donetsk. The Pokrovsk enemy group has lost its leadership. See everything happening on the front today right now. The armed forces of Ukraine are changing their tactics. This is reported by a number of military analysts, including former head of foreign intelligence Mykola Malomush. According to him, thanks to the fact that our military has moved out of a purely defensive posture and started using flanking strikes, several settlements along the entire front line have already been liberated.
We have now switched to a model of action that allows us to both defend specific positions, deliver counterstrikes, and liberate settlements. Yes, the enemy is advancing in certain areas, but for almost a week now, we have been systematically liberating several villages or towns in this sector. We are delivering counterstrikes from the flanks. It is very important that the new tactics have allowed us to act unexpectedly for the enemy. He can't concentrate strike groups or build a defensive line. He's not used to this at all, systematically defending himself. That's why the new elements in our current operations are allowing us to achieve, for now, sectoral and tactical results, but they are significant.
First of all, it is worth noting the advance of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Donetsk region, which remains the main direction of the Russian offensive. Despite the enemy grouping of more than 100,000, analysts note that the defense forces managed to liberate a settlement there, and at the same time, organize 2 encirclements of enemy units.
Ukrainian troops have liberated the village of Pankivka in the Donetsk region, further tightening the encirclement of the remaining Dobropilya salient. According to preliminary data, Russian soldiers to the north are already surrounded. 2 encirclement rings have formed there, with the infantry inside being supplied by drones from the air.
The unsuccessful attempts to help their units escape from these pockets have played into the hands of our fighters, who are fighting on the hottest front of recent months, Pokrovsk. After all, today Russia is forced to disperse its forces and significantly reduce the pressure on the northern outskirts of the city.
That's why Pokrovsk, today it's obvious that for the Russians, this was the #1 target during this offensive. Accordingly, today it has not been achieved, just as, well, probably overall we should talk about the Pokrovsk-Minograd agglomeration, which has slowed the enemy's advance. Let me remind you that the main force fighting here is the 51st Combined Arms Army of the Russian Federation, reinforced by a large number of units, including those that have already arrived from the Sumy region. Then they were redeployed to Zaporizhzhia, but they didn't stay there long because it was urgently necessary to provide support. And today they are trying to do just that. Those units that managed to pull off this flash mob in Dobropilya.
At the same time, another support for our fighters in Pokrovsk the day before came from the Air Force, which very successfully attacked a command post in Donetsk. Footage of the Russian headquarters being hit has already spread across the internet.
It's clear that the strikes in this direction were not accidental. First of all, Donetsk, well, indeed, that's where the headquarters and command posts of those very armies, those units and formations that are actually fighting in the Pokrovsk direction are gathered. Accordingly, we understand that by leaving this army without leadership, it will take time even just to appoint acting commanders to those positions, even temporarily. Yes, so in any case, the chain of command is disrupted.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian command notes that the Kremlin itself may soon change its tactics, especially in the battles for Pokrovsk. The small assault groups that tried all summer to capture this stronghold did not achieve the desired result. Therefore, Moscow may abandon its strategic ideas in favor of intensifying regular meat grinder assaults.
Well, those are the flanking maneuvers. You remember we talked about at least 3 directions. An attempt to bypass, to encircle Pokrovsk, Kramatorsk and Kostiantynivka, and accordingly to almost reach the rear and occupy these cities. I think that having failed to achieve its goals, the enemy will likely try today, among other things, first of all, to deploy its mechanized component and accordingly may even attempt a frontal assault.
But there are fewer and fewer Russians willing to attack head-on. The main intelligence directorate reported that the number of deserters in the occupiers' units has increased significantly. At the same time, the Russian command has decided to either execute or torture such soldiers.
They caught him. He almost made it across the field to the sea. I thought they wouldn't catch him. Soon, damn it, he'll be going on pit trips. So he'll be lying there with broken arms and legs as mere bait for them. For absolutely everyone who cruelly abandons their comrades in the heat of battle. One day, we'll all eventually get out of this terrible place, those who manage to survive, but there will be absolutely no mercy shown whatsoever.
Analysts also note significant successes by the Ukrainian armed forces in the Sumy region. After the Russian paratroopers and Marines were withdrawn from there to reinforce the Pokrovsk offensive, the remaining forces simply aren't able to withstand the pressure from the defense forces.
Just east of Tetkino, Ukrainian troops are gradually pushing the enemy back across the state border. That is, to the north. There, the border runs with Russia to the north and Ukraine to the south. Not long ago, the Ukrainian village of Kondratovka was liberated in this area. Now it's the turn of the village of Alexeyevka. The Russians admit that apparently they will soon lose this settlement, but they still keep clinging to it. Meanwhile, Ukrainian troops have encircled the village and are preventing the Russians from supplying their fighters.
At the same time, experts believe that there may soon be more such operations, especially considering recent insider information from the United States. For example, the Financial Times reports that the United States will send 33,000 AI-powered drones to Ukraine by the end of the year. According to forecasts, these UAVs will be used in so-called swarms and will be able to coordinate attacks on Russian positions autonomously.
Sensational. Is Europe hooked on nuclear power? France gives the green light. Poland is bringing nuclear weapons onto its territory. The Kremlin is in a panic. The Poles will become stronger. Ukraine will reveal the secrets of its air defense and share its knowledge of drone warfare. Russia, get ready.
The new nuclear axis of Europe. Poland is ready to become a country with its own nuclear shield.
As the President of the Republic of Poland, I believe that Poland should participate in nuclear sharing. It should have its own nuclear, energy, civilian, and military capabilities.
According to Naroki, on this issue, Poland is counting on the support of France. For Warsaw, this is not just an alliance, but a way to obtain the very weapon that will change the rules of the game in Europe and challenge both Moscow and Brussels.
This statement by the Polish president came shortly after an unprecedented attack by Russian drones on Poland. And although this time dozens of drones were reconnaissance drones that did not pose a direct military threat, many in Warsaw continue to fear that the attack will be repeated. And next time they could be strike drones.
To solidify nuclear cooperation, Poland is preparing to sign the Nancy Treaty, a document intended to deepen collaboration in the fields of defense and security. And although Naroki admits that it is still too early to talk about this, his position is clear. Poland intends to participate in nuclear sharing.
The undeniable fact that the nation of Poland is now beginning to seriously consider its own active participation in potentially receiving advanced nuclear weapons from its Western allies vividly demonstrates the profound and escalating level of deep concern that currently exists within many Central European countries. This apprehension is primarily due to the ongoing and increasingly brutal Russian-Ukrainian war, and furthermore, the Western leaders' apparent and persistent lack of a comprehensive understanding of precisely how they can effectively stop this devastating conflict in the foreseeable future, and crucially, how to adequately counter Russia's aggressive and expansionist ambitions, which are regrettably actively and consistently supported by the government in Beijing. And there is a growing and increasingly widespread understanding that if Putin's persistent determination to continue the war against Ukraine indefinitely is not effectively stopped by Western efforts, and there is little meaningful hope for Donald Trump in this regard, then this war will inevitably keep taking on new forms and eventually will potentially cross Ukraine's borders.
Frightened by the recent aerial incursion, Poland has quickly begun adopting Ukraine's experience in countering Russian drones. Poland's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defense Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz arrived in Kyiv along with a delegation from the Ministry of Defense and the country's armed forces. On the agenda are military technical cooperation, further support for Ukraine's defense, and the overall security situation in the context of Russian aggression.
Now we see that one way or another, this is direct evidence, not just that Ukraine needs to adopt Western military experience, but rather the reverse, that NATO countries should adopt a significant part of Ukraine's experience in waging war, modern war, real war, which no longer fully aligns with the textbooks taught at the best NATO military academies. Yes, with all due respect to their experience. And this creates for us, this is actually an additional marker of mutual dependence.
Warsaw and Kyiv have also agreed to cooperate in countering drones, sharing information about aerial threats, and implementing technologies for the rapid deployment of reconnaissance and strike drones.
A possible analysis by Russia, a kind of reconnaissance, how will Europe act in the event of the outbreak of an armed conflict? So, for example, if Russia actually violates the airspace, seriously, right? Then what NATO response forces can be mobilized? What do they look like? From where and how many? What types of aircraft take off? In other words, just to understand the framework of the response. If Russia is indeed conducting such an analysis at a serious level, then, well, that's a sign that we really need to prepare for a serious armed clash between Western and Russian armed forces, regardless even of what happens with Ukraine, whether the war in Ukraine ends or not.
At the same time, Poland is launching an unprecedented rearmament program. Its expenditures are enormous. In particular, this includes combat aircraft and helicopters, a wide range of armored vehicles, tube and rocket artillery systems, modern air defense systems, and munitions. At the same time, Warsaw is actively ramping up its own weapons production. In addition, the country has planned a record defense budget for next year, 200 billion zlotys, or about $55 billion, which amounts to approximately 4.8% of GDP. Furthermore, efforts are underway to significantly increase the size of the armed forces from 200,000 to 500,000 personnel. The Polish authorities consistently emphasize that the country is using all available resources to guarantee its own security.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Now that's a twist. Scandinavia is arming itself to the teeth. Europe. On high alert, Denmark is buying missiles and drones for deep strikes. Russia is the main threat, a historic record in military spending. Denmark shocks the world. Missiles and drones are ready to launch. Copenhagen is ready to strike. Watch all the details right now.
Denmark will purchase long-range missiles and drones due to the threat from Russia. This was announced by the country's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen. Denmark's Defense Minister Troels Lund Poulsen noted that with these new resources, the armed forces will be able to actively counter threats far from the country. According to Poulsen, the experience of the war in Ukraine has shown that it is important not only to build a layered air defense, but also to have the means to strike targets on enemy territory, including missile launchers.
Denmark is unlikely to be able to defend itself from Russia on its own, which is why Denmark is one of the key members of the North Atlantic Alliance, the NATO bloc. Over the past 30 years, the European members of NATO have significantly disarmed, and Europe was dominated by the principle of relying on protection from the United States. However, with Trump coming to the White House, it turned out that this was not entirely the case.
According to the Commander-in-Chief of the Danish Army, General Michael Weigers Gilgaard, high-precision long-range weapons will allow the military to counter threats before they reach their territory.
And Denmark, among others, is interested in acquiring and deploying missile systems with a range of more than 600 kilometers. More than 600 kilometers, that is, exceeding the range of short-range tactical missiles.
Russia's ambassador to Copenhagen, Vladimir Barbin, responded to Denmark's statement immediately. According to him, nowhere and never in the world has anyone even thought of publicly threatening a nuclear power. And now Russia must proceed from the fact that Denmark is not only considering the possibility of a direct military confrontation with it, but is also preparing for such a scenario.
Russia is clearly demonstrating, and in fact, their primary goal was to explicitly demonstrate the profound lack of unity and cohesion within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, to actively sow discord and significant disagreement among the various member states of the alliance, to ultimately split and effectively destroy the entire European security system and its foundational principles. They managed to accomplish this feat through rather simple and seemingly straightforward means, at first glance making it exceedingly difficult to definitively prove Russia's direct and undeniable guilt in these matters. If one deliberately chooses not to acknowledge or perceive the evidence, then indeed it becomes incredibly challenging to discern the truth. Nevertheless, Europeans are already clearly seeing the aggressive and expansionist nature of the Russian Federation, and while they have not yet fully accepted that a full-scale war with Russia, if not entirely inevitable, is indeed quite possible and a significant threat to regional stability. Moreover, in the near future,
Prime Minister Fredriksson responded to the statement of the Russian ambassador by saying that they will in no way influence Denmark's decision and that her country will not allow Russia to intimidate them.
Shock. Putin's army in the Barents Sea is practicing strikes against NATO, and moreover, Russian troops are preparing for war with Finland. The bunker dweller has completely lost his mind, and Iskanders are already in Kaliningrad. The alliance is preparing to retaliate for Russia's brazen actions. How will this confrontation end? Stay tuned to find out.
A Russian drone attack on Poland and the Zapad 2025 military exercise in Belarus. A rehearsal for an attack on NATO's eastern flank.
During the exercises in Belarus, the Russian Federation is practicing the seizure of the Suwałki corridor.
Russia isn't even hiding its goals and objectives. In Kaliningrad, Russia is openly deploying Iskanders in broad daylight on a busy road as a show of force. The Defense Ministry of the aggressor country reports daily on successful training and combat missile and bomb strikes using aviation and the Navy against the territory of the North Atlantic Alliance.
Crews of MiG-31 aircraft equipped with the Kinjal aviation complex carried out a flight over the neutral waters of the Barents Sea as part of the joint strategic exercise Zapad 2025. While carrying out the training and combat mission, the crews practiced delivering a simulated airstrike on the enemy's critically important targets.
In response, NATO is strengthening its military capabilities in countries neighboring Russia. According to Polish media, the mission Eastern Guard, announced the day before by Mark Rutte, has already begun.
The Polish General Staff published footage of a French A-400 transport plane landing in Minsk Mazowiecki. It delivered weapons for Rafale fighter jets, which, as it turns out, are already in Poland.
As part of the mission, countries of Western and Northern Europe are strengthening the military technical capabilities of those nations most vulnerable to the Russian threat.
These activities will involve, in particular, Denmark, France, Britain, and Germany. This is quite telling. In other words, we are talking about the practical application of Article 5 of the NATO Charter, namely, collective security on the territory of both Poland and the Baltic states. There is a redeployment taking place, involving both the armed forces of these countries and, accordingly, the NATO member states. First and foremost, this is about strengthening land borders to prevent possible provocations.
The protection of the eastern sky is also being reinforced. France, Britain, and Germany are deploying Rafale and Eurofighter jets, as well as additional air defense systems, to the territories of bordering countries.
Any inaction, of course, is a clear demonstration of significant weakness, which actively encourages the Russian Federation and other potential aggressors in the future to brazenly violate the established borders of the international architecture that was originally established in Yalta, Potsdam, and America, and which the United States is now diligently trying to maintain and uphold.
Now the question is whether the US will support Europe. After Donald Trump's vague response, European politicians began to doubt Washington's willingness to actually defend NATO's borders.
What is your reaction to the drone incursion into Poland? It could have been a mistake. It might have been a mistake. But regardless of that, I am not happy about anything related to this situation. But I hope that, with this situation, I hope everything will be resolved.
The Kremlin is watching Europe's and the US's response. Weakness and ignoring the problem will serve as an invitation for Putin to move from rehearsal to an actual attack.
The apocalypse of Putin's oil empire. Key facilities have been destroyed by Ukrainian drones. Russia is in a gasoline collapse, panic at gas stations, and a fuel crisis. Ukrainian iron birds are turning Putin's oil into ashes, and Moscow is in complete shock. All the details coming up.
Production stoppages, disruptions at fuel enterprises, a fuel crisis, gasoline shortages, kilometer-long lines at gas stations, the introduction of ration cards, and record price increases. The fuel shortage is hitting Russia harder than it is the wallets of officials. And it's all thanks to the Ukrainian armed forces' drones, which have already knocked out 1/6 of all oil refining in Russia. The crisis hit even before the end of the year.
Before that,
Fuel problems were only observed in the Saratov region and the far east of Russia. Afterwards, shortages were recorded in the Nizhny Novgorod, Rostov and Ryazan regions, as well as in Crimea.
Friends, comrades, what's going on? There's no connection, Telegram isn't working, WhatsApp isn't working. I came to the gas station to fill up, but they say they're out of gasoline. Now they're only giving it out with coupons. What do you mean with coupons? What's happening? Have we gone back to the Soviet Union?
You wanted to go back to the USSR, and now you got it. There are already fuel shortages in more than 20 regions.
We've got more problems here. The fuel shortages started in Kamyshakhtinsky, and now here too. To fill up your car, you have to wait in line for a kilometer. About 60 or 70 cars at a single gas station. And when it's finally your turn, you drive up and there's no gasoline left.
In occupied Donetsk, there's no 95-octane fuel at the gas stations, and the prices for regular fuel are much higher than in Moscow itself.
There's absolutely no water in Donetsk. And now, in many places, there's also no gasoline available either, or it's incredibly expensive at 85 per liter. People just gradually get used to this difficult situation.
Residents of the occupied cities of Ukraine complain about lines at gas stations and limits on the amount of fuel that can be purchased at one time with ration cards. Fuel is mostly unavailable in the settlements occupied by Russia since 2014. There's also a gasoline crisis in occupied Mariupol. Prices are rising rapidly and huge lines 2 to 3 hours long are forming at gas stations. In Severodonetsk, Luhansk region, due to the shortage of gasoline, only 2 buses are available for several routes. Oil traders report a severe shortage of gasoline and diesel fuel. Products are being released with a waiting time of 3 to 4 or even 5 to 7 days. In Russia, they continue to lie to citizens, saying that the possible reason is seasonal fuel price increases and a rise in tourist activity. But as we can see, Ukrainian drones have proven to be far more effective than any plan from the Ministry of Economic Development. Another plant was hit, the largest Russian oil refinery in the Leningrad region. The Kiryevsky oil refinery is among Russia's top 10 and processes about 21 million tons of oil per year. It produces gasoline, diesel, fuel oil, and aviation fuel. And here is the Ryazan oil refinery giant, which belongs to Rosneft. More than 13 million tons of oil are processed annually. Since the beginning of August, 2 units there had already been completely shut down after previous strikes, and now the entire plant is operating at half capacity. Journalists calculated that in 2025, drones struck Russian oil refineries 38 times, and 24 of those attacks were successful. Refineries were shut down for repairs, either partially or completely halting fuel production. 5 plants have already been shut down: Kuibyshev, Novokuibyshev and Syzran, all owned by Rosneft. The same fate befell the Volgograd, Lukoil and Afipsky refineries.
The most effective sanctions are those that work the fastest. That's fire. At Russian oil refineries, terminals, and oil depots.
The fuel crisis has also been exacerbated by Russia's budgetary problems, which have made gasoline sales unprofitable for companies. Even in Russia's remote regions, where Ukrainian drones do not reach, there is also a shortage of fuel. Putin does not comment on the situation at all because he is hiding it. The Kremlin can no longer provide compensation to companies from the state budget. This year, Russia has a deficit budget, and as of today, it already exceeds 5 trillion rubles. Thanks to Putin, who started the war.
The Belarusian military sensation, the Saffron laser complex. Now not a single drone will pay a visit to the fatherland's leader. Oh, that's not a given. Considering that the superweapon is stolen, the only question is whether China knows about it. Watch the sensational details right now.
On the last day of the Zapad 2025 exercises, the Russians and Belarusians decided to amaze the world with their Wunderwaffe called Saffron. Propaganda media spread the news online. At the Borisovsky training ground north of Minsk, a combat laser was tested. A mobile system capable of destroying small drones at a distance of 1 kilometer. All that is known about it are the parameters announced by the presenter. Target engagement time is less than 10 seconds and the crew consists of 3 people. Back in the summer of 2024, Russians reported that Russia and Belarus had prepared a new combat laser for testing. The Belarusians even made a report from the Scientific and Technical Center LEMDI, which has been developing laser technologies since 2023. The designers called their creation the Hyperboloid and showed the first assembled prototype.
The system created at the Belarusian enterprise can operate in conjunction with various radar systems. The Belarusian system is installed in special containers. The laser is deployed on a platform directly at the moment of use and operates on a pulsed basis. This means that the energy flash can only be seen during the active engagement of a target. In addition, the entire system can be installed not only in special facilities or underground for camouflage purposes, but also deployed on mobile platforms.
In May of this year, a Belarusian public page that publishes information on military-related topics posted these 2 photos, one showing a falling drone and the other the so-called combat laser Saffron. From this, analysts concluded that the system had been tested. And now they have announced during large-scale exercises conducted by the so-called Union states near the country's borders. Ukrainian analysts have already criticized this show, saying that the Russians were flaunting a prototype in front of observers and participants from other countries. Moreover, as with other so-called unparalleled projects, this weapon is most likely a repackaged Chinese solution known as Silent Hunter. The most interesting thing is that earlier the Russians did the same thing based on it, only under the name Nomad.
At the same time, what's most interesting is that the Russians themselves admit this. The laser system shown in the photo is a Chinese development called the Low Altitude Laser Defending System, or LAS. The name Silent Hunter also appears online. This is an improved version of the LAS system with a power output of up to 30 kilowatts, available in both stationary and mobile variants, and most likely developed by the Chinese Academy of Engineering Physics.
Recently, a device called Kvadrat appeared at Zapad 2025. This is a Russian terminal that Moscow presents as an analog to Starlink. This equipment was used to provide communications for units and elements of the regional military grouping. There is no information about it in open sources, but visually, it resembles the American system. It is known that Kvadrat is designed for transmitting large volumes of data at the regimental or divisional level, with the capability to use various communication systems, secure email, and video conferencing. In addition to Kvadrat, terminals called Sprint were also used during the exercises. These only became known recently at the end of June, when Russian media reported on deliveries to the 20th Combined Arms Army of the Western grouping. And of course, aside from the new developments, for the finale of the exercises, the Russians and Belarusians reserved maneuvers involving the notorious Oreshnik system.
Among the most significant events were activities such as planning and reviewing the use of non-strategic nuclear weapons, as well as the assessment and deployment of the Oreshnik mobile missile complex. Our Russian colleagues shared their combat experience with us, which allows us to say that our units today are receiving the most up-to-date, most advanced information, which is being mechanically and automatically integrated into their combat operations.
The Zapad 2025 exercise turned out to be larger in scale than analysts had expected. The armies of Belarus and Russia carried out several maneuvers at once and showcased their own developments. After several years of being an information outcast, Minsk hosted dozens of foreign journalists and delegates to show off its weaponry and the armies of dictators.
They liked it so much that they promised to repeat it in 2 years.
That's all for now, and for more hot news from the front, tune in to the next episode.